This is a recording of the fourth Emotional Sobriety Workshop presented by Freethinkers Living Sober Group of the Verde Valley of Arizona. It was presented on March 28th, 2021. Welcome to our fourth workshop on emotional sobriety. My name is John R. I'm an average alcoholic and happy to be dealt in for another hand today. I will be your host, moderator, and co-panelist for our session today. Glad you're all here. The agenda today is Marya H. will be our main speaker for a bit on the topic emotional range, skillfully navigating highs, lows, and in-betweens. She'll talk for about 30 minutes. Then the panelists will make some comments and a brief discussion, about 20 minutes or so, and then a break. After that, we'll open the discussion to anyone who would like to raise their hand or make brief comments or have questions. We'll do that for about an hour. Because of the size of the meeting, we ask you to keep your comments to 2 minutes or so, and Kat will let you know when the 2 minutes have expired so you can wrap it up. Please note this meeting is being recorded for the audio for future posting. Our panelists today, Marya Hornbacher is a New York Times best-selling author, journalist, poet, and teacher who's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Her books include Waiting, A Non-Believer's Higher Power, Wasted, a memoir of anorexia and bulimia, which has been published in 12 languages, and most recently, the recovery book Sane, Mental Illness, Addiction, and the 12 Steps. If you haven't read her work, we highly recommend it. Personally, Waiting is one of my favorite all-time recovery books. Dr. Alan Berger Ph D is a popular public speaker and nationally recognized expert on the science of recovery. He's the author of 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and the Drugs Are Gone. He's presented all over the place in the last several years. So if you Google him for YouTube, you'll find a bunch of his work. He also is going to be publishing fairly soon 12 Insights for Emotional Sobriety. I mucked up the title. Alan, do you want to tell me the title again? Are you there?
Yeah, I have to unmute. It's 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. Getting your recovery unstuck.
Thank you. I've read a lot of his stuff.
Getting your tongue unstuck will not solve that problem. Yeah.
I should have written it down. See, I didn't write it down. And Joe C., the infamous Joe C., is probably familiar to most of you. Beyond Belief, Agnostic Musics for a 12-Step. Musings, not musics, maybe musics too, for a 12-step life. He's an author, a friend. He's also a dad, a songwriter, a radio host, financial planner. So those of you who need help in that area. We are also very honored to count him as a member of our home group, Away from Home. Little housekeeping. I want to thank our volunteers who are supporting the webinar in the background. John S. is acting as our stage manager. Kat L. is our timekeeper and chat host. And Mark is tech support and all-around good guy. So thank you, all three of you. We couldn't have done this without you. There's no doubt about that. The workshop has a chat function for the discussion portion. You'll be able to send questions to our panelists, the hosts. If you have a tech problem or something like that, Mark will be paying attention for that. So I ask that you please stay muted unless you're called on to share in the discussion portion when we'll open up the chat for people to be able to chat with each other, etc. Again, it's being recorded. So keep anonymity in mind if you're asking or responding to questions or answers or anything like that. You can rename yourself. If you want to remove your last name or something like that, just hover over your video and choose rename. Because there's a lot of attendees, we probably won't get to all of your questions or all of your comments, but without any further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce our presenter today, Marya. Thank you for being here, Marya.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. What a great crowd. Great to see those of you returning from previous seminars. Great to see all of my fellow panelists. And it's good to see some names of friends as well. So thanks all for being here. I do have a bunch of material to get through. That said, I hate PowerPoints. I hate screen sharing. And so I'm not gonna, because I don't have to. And so I'm just going to talk. And if you get bored, by all means, wander off, do your thing. Kindly turn off your camera if you do decide to do that, though. That said, I'm going to jump in. My feelings about emotion are it's such a funny thing to talk about at all. Emotional sobriety, when I talk about it, people say, well, what's emotional insobriety? What's the demarcating line for us? When am I being emotionally unsober? When am I being, emotionally whatever? The way I define emotional sobriety may not be how other people do, but what I do is I use roughly the same demarcation I do with knowing when I've gone too far with a behavior, with a process addiction. It's not a hard and fast line. I can't give up emotion. I can't give up feeling strongly, nor should I have to, nor should anybody else. And so my feeling about emotional sobriety is really, is my emotional life allowing me to live fully and allowing me to feel more broadly than just narrow good, bad, without impinging on anyone else's life? I mean, a lot of this has to do with playing well with others, sharing the sandbox, having an emotional life that is both satisfying and rich to me, but that is not infringing on other people's rights and, for that matter, recovery. So that's kind of the demarcation that I want to make setting out. There is no hard and fast, I am an emotional addict, I am an emotional junkie. However, like porn, we know it when we see it, right? So the feeling I have about emotional wellness is always going to go back to balance. Am I keeping myself in a grounded and sort of middle path state? So I want to tell you about two stories. When I was really little, like grade school age, I hated school. I hated everything about my life because I was a stubborn and awful little child, but also I was living in some pretty difficult circumstances. Every day after school, I would feel like I had a volcano like in my chest, like about to just, it was gonna blow, it was gonna consume me and possibly everyone else. And I did what I knew how to do then, which was to lock myself in the basement of my parents' suburban Rambler and dance. I would put a record on the stereo and I would blast the music and I would sing and I would dance. And when the record was done, I would start it again. And I danced until I was exhausted. And I tell you, I have never felt emotional freedom like that until I started dancing again in my kitchen like 3 weeks ago. So I realized something when I was dancing in my kitchen the other day. I was like, why have I not been dancing all this time? Why did I skip the part? I've been in therapy, I've been in psych wards, I've been in rehab, I've been in recovery, blah, 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 blah. But in fact, clearly what I needed to do was find whatever baseline emotional process works for me. And it turns out it's dancing in my kitchen. It may be simpler than we think. I think there's a way we can get super complicated in our approach to emotional sobriety that may, instead of helping us, instead of healing us, actually trip us up. So I used to dance in my parents' basement. So flash forward 10 years, I'm in some psych ward or another, some rehab or another, and I'm sitting in the same circle, and you guys all been there, a lot of you have anyway, and you're looking at your feelings chart. And I think I feel like this feels important. I'm going to share this screen with you. Can I share my screen? It's so cute. I found it. Here we go. Yes, here we are. Yep. There is our feelings chart. So you're in the psych ward, right? And they've handed these out. The last time I was in the psych ward, everybody on the feelings chart was still white and male, which thankfully has changed. Also, we didn't have this many varieties of feelings 10, 20 years ago when I was last in there. But I remember sitting there and looking and looking and looking for my feelings and realizing in that moment that they didn't have all of my feelings. And I was upset about this because I was like, they don't have my feeling. And the nice person in khakis, who's like in charge of being normal and in charge of teaching us how to be normal, says, and Marya, I want to support you in your feeling. How are you feeling? And I say, I'm feeling ambivalent. None of these words is accurate to what I'm feeling. I'm feeling ambivalent. And she smiles and she's like, I so support you in your feelings, but can you choose one of the feelings that's on our approved feeling list? And I'm like, no. And so that's the thing. It's like, the thing about emotional sobriety is I am not ever going to fit into somebody else's emotional box, and I don't have to. What I have to do is learn to get okay with my own emotional range. There are a couple of things I get to reject. I get to reject other people telling me I'm not supposed to be angry, or I need to get myself under control, if in fact what I'm doing is sitting there reading a book and looking cross. I mean, other people aren't actually the people I need to turn to for guidance on my emotional life. I need to be okay with me. I need to be appropriate in public. I try not to get in battles with, I try not to have road rage. But really, I do need to do a constant process of discernment. How am I feeling, and is it okay with me? So I want to move on there to inactive addiction. Others of you may have experienced something similar. When I started dealing with my emotions in ways that were not dancing, when I started looking for other behaviors, other less functional, less proactive behaviors, drugs, alcohol, whatever, eating disorders, et cetera, I stopped learning how to be agile emotionally. I stopped learning to identify, this is a feeling that is stronger than I'm comfortable with. What can I do with it that will make me feel better without harming other people? So I started turning to what they eventually in therapy always call maladaptive behaviors, which great. We all have our maladaptive behaviors. However, I got sober in my late 20s and suddenly was like, all of my emotional skills are maladaptive, turns out. And that's distressing. It's emotionally upsetting, in fact. And I'm like, well, then I quit. I don't have any emotional skills. So it's easy at that point, or it was for me, to go, well, I'm an addict. I'm a selfish addict. When in fact, frankly, everybody, I was just kind of an asshole. And so it's easy also to get into this space of, I am emotionally unsound. I'm emotionally dysregulated. It's because I'm an addict. All my addict friends totally get it. All my addicted relationships are totally driven by that. And I get to be like that in the world. That's, to me, not accurate. To me, living in constant emotional excess and excusing it is not recovery. That's not emotional sobriety as I understand it, or as I want to experience it or understand it in my life. So part of the process of emotional sobriety for me, again, is discernment. What am I okay with? How am I behaving in a way that facilitates other people's emotional growth, emotional space? I want to stay away, though, from words like emotional safety. The world is not responsible for making me feel emotionally safe, and it probably won't start anytime soon. So like that expectation is another piece of what I want to talk about a little bit today. The expectations I have for my own emotional life, if I'm expecting a baseline of happy, I will be gravely disappointed all the time, all the time. Not only are we not baseline happy, I am a crabby, curmudgeonly human being, and I am often baseline crabby. And that's okay with me. Like, nobody has to bother with me when I'm in that state of mind. I don't generally go out and like try and, I'm not out picking daisies when I'm in my curmudgeon state of mind. And so again, it's a matter of recognizing my boundaries, recognizing when I'm okay to be around other people, recognizing that I don't have to go out and spout recoveryisms to make other people comfortable with how I feel either. So it's really this sort of like toggling between emotional excess and emotional absence on one side and the other. And so again, I want to come back to emotional range. At some point or another, I was given a diagnosis of bipolar. Now my diagnosis on the whatever TX sheet says, basically it says moody. I'm moody. That's my psychiatric diagnosis, which to me is really quite funny. Indeed, I am moody. I am deeply and problematically moody. But as yet, we don't have a cure for moody people. We just are them. And so knowing that about myself, my task is not to necessarily medicate it. My task is not to apologize for it. My task is to learn how to live with my own emotional range. Outside of addiction, in addiction, my feeling in addiction was, if anything if I am feeling any discomfort at all, it's bad. Like if you've bothered me, if I've bothered me, if I'm sad, if I'm mad, if I'm bored, if I'm disappointed, if I'm aggrieved, if I'm feeling things are unjust, if I am crabby, if any of these things to me is a reason to say, well, my baseline happy is not being met, I need to find, whether it's substances or behaviors or other people, to get myself back to this expectation that I am going to be happy any minute now. And if I was behaving myself, I would be satisfied with everything and be happy. And that if I was not satisfied with everything and was not happy, I need to see a physician about that lack of happiness. I don't buy it anymore. I just don't. And so since I have yet to find a cure for my own personality, and since my personality is not appreciably harming other people, I am stuck with me and with going, I am now with learning, where are my limits? And so that's where I talk about creating parameters for myself. It's very easy for me to be, to make a great leap. So I can go from it's raining to I'm depressed in about 10 seconds logically. That is not actually a logical connection. It's raining is just a fact. It's raining. My feeling of what? Blues? Sick of the rain? It's March. I don't like it. That does not necessarily become a problem. No one has to fix the weather for me, but I also don't have to freak out that I'm depressed. So that's a kind of a problematic thing that I run up against a lot, is knowing when is too much, when am I at too much sadness? When am I at too much mad? When am I at too anxious? You know, what is that too line? And again, I want to come back to, that is for us individually to decide, so long as we are not harming other people with our emotional lives. It is for us to say, I can tolerate a good bit of anxiety and continue with my day. But that's where we get to, what are the emotional skills that we need for our own emotional range? In my emotional range, I can go very high, I can go very low, I can be extremely anxious, I can be extremely angry. All of these are far edges. And my guideline always is this emotional state that I am in interfering with the other aspects of my life that are important? And that's where I want to kind of just get to one key point that I feel like is news to a lot of people. It certainly was news to me many years ago. Emotions are not an emergency. It is not a disaster to feel bad. It is not a crisis to be depressed. It is not, all things do not have to go from 0 to emergency in seconds flat. However, whether it's because we're all addicts or, you know, whatever it is, we do tend to be, to sort of catastrophize emotional states that aren't comfortable. So my choice for myself is, all right, this is a degree of sad that is now uncomfortable, but I'm still getting up and going to work. My dishes are not cluttering my kitchen. You know, what are the baseline things for me that I need to feel comfortable? Once the sad starts interfering with not just other people's comfort, but like my relationships with them, when am I no longer doing things skillfully? When am I stopping things that are key, like my work, like my advocacy, like my relationship contact? When those things start to fall off, I've passed my parameter of what's okay with me emotionally. The first sign for me, though, is other people are feeling some discomfort. That's a toggly spot, though. So like if somebody says to me, your anger is making me really uncomfortable, what do I do with that? Is it because there's something wrong with my anger? Well, it kind of depends on the topic and it kind of depends on the relationship. And so that always is going to be like a case by case thing. So I had an interesting experience though in therapy the other day. I was like, I'm dealing with all this anger. And she goes, I just want to stop you and say, anger at injustice is not an illness. Injustice is an illness. Your anger that it exists is actually appropriate. What you do with that anger, and I'm like, right, exactly. It's what I do with that anger. Do I self-destruct because I'm angry at injustice? That is not skillful. Do I destruct other people's stuff because of injustice? Also not skillful. And so there, again, we're back at this kind of question of, where do I end and you begin? Where do my rights end and yours begin? I may not be the only person in the room who has some experience with emotional junkies. People, I've been one, I'm not right now, but I could still be again. People who kind of keep seeking out drama or crisis or disaster, or people who will engage in cyclical emotional bonds with them, that kind of stuff. I get the draw of that because I feel like we all is a very, very, very broad and unfair and unnuanced terms. I do think people are drawn to things that feel intense. Emotion often feels intense, dramatic emotion like love, like anger, like hatred, like indignance. Indignitude is my favorite word lately, not a word at all. Those strong feelings are like flames, and human beings, I do think, are drawn to that flame. You and I all know how fast moths get fried on bulbs. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's always carry the metaphor through to how far and at what point do you cut yourself off from the emotional fuel? I myself am dealing a lot lately with trying to define for myself how much loneliness is just loneliness and how much is I keep expecting to become lonely when I'm alone. So those there too, we're always looking at what are the cultural forces that tell us how we should feel. I'm single, I live alone. I really like it. I'm super comfortable. And when it's just me, nobody is here dealing with my curmudgeonliness, just me. And so like part of me, people are like, oh, are you sad? Are you lonely? And there's part of me going, no, should I be? And so then that's just, a lot of different aspects of how we can find boundaries and parameters for our own kind of emotional state. Looking at emotional recovery, or if we want to use the recovery sobriety framework, my sense when I stopped with the process addictions and the substance abusing, my experience was that I was all emotions all the time. That's exhausting. Any of you who are, and it isn't just early recovery. We go through, I think, cycles of feeling like I'm a raw nerve. In that period, every emotion does seem like an emergency. Every emotion someone has to be notified that we're having a feeling. That can't last. Emotions are not a full-time job, or they really shouldn't be. If emotions are your full-time job, I'm super glad you're here. That's why we're all here. And so the need to keep emotion in its place in my life has become it's become kind of an interesting quality of recovery for me, is figuring out where does emotion fit? We're all, sort of steeped in this Western Cartesian idea that here's emotion and here is thought and here is body and here is spirit. And we've got all these parts and everything like that. That's fine. But in fact, when I have an emotion, it is going to give rise to a thought, and vice versa. It's all quite recursive. Stuff in my body can give rise to an emotion as well, like pain, dealing with chronic pain. People are dealing with emotional lives. So none of that can be separated out fully. And being mindful of the fact that we're always being influenced by all sorts of factors, and none of them in and of themselves is probably a disaster. I also want to acknowledge here that talking about emotional sobriety is easy when I have a roof over my head and food. When our basic needs are met, we can talk about these sort of luxurious aspects of sobriety and recovery. If your basic needs aren't met, that is an emergency. I just heard some static there. So I want to acknowledge that, it is very difficult these aren't lines, these aren't charts, these aren't, it doesn't all break down neatly and tidily. So when I'm looking at emotional range, I'm really looking at all of these grays. I'm not looking at any sort of diametrical oppositions, good, bad, happy, sad. It is all the grays. In addiction, though, it was either cause to use or abuse, or I'm fine. Now I have to deal with more nuance. And part of emotional recovery for me is getting skillful at identifying. Like a friend will call me and say, how are you? And I'll be like, I'm a little blue. And you'd think that we'd set off an alert for, it's a federal case, it's an emergency. I'm like, no, I'm a little blue, like periwinkle, like it's not a bad blue, it's a fine blue. It's deep, but it's not a serious blue. There is no emergency. And I realize when I say things like that I get to live in a place in my life where emotional nuance is okay with me. Somebody's, I think, losing track of their mic here and there. And so recovery does involve, for me, emotional recovery does involve getting skillful at managing my emotions. I make it sound like they're a pet. They're not a pet. getting skillful at managing how much they influence other aspects of my life. So this isn't about, I'm not letting my emotions interfere with my thoughts. My emotions and my thoughts are inseparable to an extent. What I try and do in recovery is create a pause, create a gap between, here's my thought. Okay, injustice has occurred, whatever it is. Somebody cut me off in traffic, or racism. Something massive or something tiny, something global or something personal, doesn't matter. It'll still trip my injustice button, right? So at that moment, I do have the responsibility to not chase the other car. The job then is not to act out my strong, epic injustice emotion. My job then is to stop and go, this feels a lot like all the other times I got pissed about injustice. What do I do? What have I done in the past that worked? What have I done in the past that didn't work? Like chasing other cars, which, trust me, I've done, not as effective. Sitting in your car and being like, I wonder what it is that makes me think I am justice and jury and judge for everybody else's goddamn driving. That's the opportunity. That's what a pause gives me. There's actually some sort of acronym for pause. Somebody has it. I think it's, perceive, ask, understand, strategize, evaluate. If that works for you, great. You can make whatever acronym you want. For me, it's just give it a second, give it a minute. And here we are, all uncomfortable in this silence, like, ouch, a minute, we have to stop. But actually, silence and a minute, not only do they not kill us, they give us that second to save our own goddamn lives. So for me, that minute between I am having a feeling and the feeling is so intolerable, I'm already drunk. If I have that minute, I can go, why did I choose that? What happened here? And what can I do differently this time? And that's all the pause needs to do. That's really all it does. And it's all it needs to do for me. So I'm thinking about a lot these days about emotional range, about creating parameters for myself, about acceptable range, about creating that pause that gives me a second, and about also taking a strengths-based approach to my emotional life. A lot of people in clinical care possibly would look at me and be like, she is really not in a position to talk about emotional wellness. And I actually feel like, because I deal with strong emotion all day, every day, learning to manage it in a way that allows me to get up, go to work, have friendships, be a family member, and be a partner, I actually might be the person to talk to about how do I deal with constant, nonstop, strong emotion. It doesn't make me an authority, but I can tell you what not to do. And so I will also tell you the key things, like this is like emotional parameters for dummies. The things that I require to keep myself in a healthy and not comfortable, but okay emotional range. I need insight. That's the number one thing. And that's where that pause is. In that pause, I can get some distance from myself. That's the other thing. That's another thing I need, which is detachment or distance. A second away from, that's a strong feeling you're having over there, isn't it, Marya? Should we maybe not act on it before we've had any thoughts? Let's have thoughts. Let's call friends. Let's call sponsors. Let's meditate. Let's do any number of things before we hit send on that horrible, bitchy email, whatever it is. So detachment gives us that minute. Perspective is huge for me, because let's take the exact instance the injustice of being cut off in traffic. Friends, the injustices in the world are in fact epic. Me being cut off in traffic doesn't make the list. And if I want to expend emotional energy on injustice, there are lots of ways I can do that. There are lots of productive, helpful, and actually really healing ways I can channel all that indignitude into something that can provide health, support, even just a space to talk for someone who is experiencing real injustice. So I can put that one maybe on the shelf, get off my little high horse and shut up. Practice. And that unfortunately is time. I've gotten better at lots of these things. I am by no means, I'm not coming to you. I was thinking about this and I'm like, when I go to a talk, or even when I give a talk, I sort of assume a level of expertise or someone who knows what they're talking about. In recovery, it's not degrees. It's not, I'm not a Zen master. I'm not a yoga teacher. I do a lot of meditation. I do a lot of yoga, but not because I'm good at it, because I need it. And so that's the only qualifications any of us have in meetings, for one thing. But the only qualification I have is that I've had a lot of time to think about, and a lot of opportunity, frankly, to think about, well, that didn't work. What are my other options? How are people who are doing it skillfully doing it? And so that information doesn't always come in meetings. It doesn't always come in therapy. A lot of it is, kitchen wisdom. A lot of it is hearing from somebody, oh, hey, meditation has been really helpful for me, and this and this and this. And so I kind of, in a minute, I'm going to wrap this up, and hopefully, as we go into my fellow panelists' comments on this, and when we get to the discussion, you guys can talk a little bit about what works for you. Because there isn't a single strategy. We need one of our own. We need to find, we've been told so often and so many times, you're an addict, you're a disordered person, you're this, you're that, you're the other thing. I have an order that works for me, and that's what I need. I don't need an order that works for you, and I also can't give you one that works for you, because I don't know what kind of homunculus you have in your head running around and telling you to do things the dumb way. The last thing we need is skills. And that's kind of what I want to turn this over on, is when I stopped one or another addiction, right? I suddenly found myself wanting my grand gesture. I'm having a feeling, now it is an emergency. I need a grand gesture. What is my grand gesture? I can't do any of these acting out, self-destructive or other destructive things. What's my grand gesture? And the worst news is this. This is the bad news. Usually the requirement for your emotion is nothing. Usually emotional states don't require an action. If anything, guys, dancing goes a long, long way. And it is 1:35. I know that's brief. I will talk more if we need us to, but I'd like to open it up to my other panelists now, if I could. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Marya. It's great. I appreciate it. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Alan first. Alan, would you like to make any comments?
Okay, there we go.
There
Yes.
you go.
Someone else had to see that this was a good experience of powerlessness. This is it. This is it. It's that somebody else has that mute and unmute button. Thank God that I don't have it all the time. Wow, I am so moved by so much of your reflection. I think the word stands out to me in terms of experience, and you talk about this, is just the humility that you've cultivated in your life. And I do believe it's impossible for us to achieve some semblance of emotional sobriety without humility. And I think the other part of this is that I don't think we have a very good understanding of what it is. And so, being a psychologist, as I try to look into these things and try to understand them, and I just happen to have a very, very big book. And it's not the big book that you're thinking about, but it's this big book, the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychology. And in fact, it's the second edition. And they have defined humility. And I'd like to share that definition with you, because I think it's so important. So by the way, there's a lot of big books out there, aren't there? A lot of big books out there. So this is their definition. So they start out saying, well, it's the quality of being humble. But what is that? So they goes, it's characterized by a low focus on the self. So just absorb that for a minute. It's characterized by a low focus on the self. Look, for me, one of the things that I was told is that my problem is self-centeredness, selfishness, self-will run riot. So that made a lot of sense to me. This whole thing about that somehow, if I'm going to achieve emotional sobriety, it has to do with a low focus on the self. Now, the second part of the definition is an accurate, not an over or underestimated sense of one's accomplishments and worth. You see, humility is about, I think, an alignment with reality, an alignment with who we are, alignment with, as you talked about, an alignment with the world as it is, alignment with our experiences. And this becomes, I think, an important thing. But then they go on, the third part of the definition, probably my favorite, although I think 1 and 2 are so important. But the third part is an acknowledgement of one's limitations, imperfections, mistakes, gaps in knowledge, and so on. So I'll say that again, an acknowledgement of one's limitations, imperfections, mistakes, and gaps in knowledge. Well, wow. So there's a very interesting thing here, and it's almost paradoxical. It's a low focus on myself, which for me means that it's not all about what I want. It may be for me, but I don't have the right to put my expectations on you to fulfill my needs. That's my job. I can make requests all day long, but the infringement on another person comes when I demand that you do what I want you to do. I can make any request, I can ask you for what I want, but the real proof is going to be how I respond when you say no. So if I say, hey, I'd really, like to hang out with you. I'd like this to, I'd like to spend this time doing this with you. And you come back and say, I don't have time for that right now. Well, what do I do at that moment? See, that's the moment where emotional sobriety becomes so important. And I love what you said. In some way, the pause is giving us a chance to have a more grounded relationship with ourselves and not to be so reactive. Because oftentimes my immediate thing is, well, you don't want, but look at all I've done for you. That might be one of the first things I'll say, because what I'm saying is I'm really not concerned with how you feel. I just want you to do what I want you to do. That's, by the way, that's the emotional unsobriety that you were talking about a moment ago. So it's somehow, and Bill Wilson speaks about this, I think, so well when he talks about surrendering our crippling expectations. You see, that's the thing that I've struggled with. And I say struggle with it. I don't mean struggled with it. And now I think I've gotten to a point where I say, well, come on, you don't have a right to dump that on someone else. If they're interested in participating, fine stuff. But what I'm saying struggle is that there's always these things that are in the unconscious that I don't even know are expectations. And I thought that you hit on one that was such a good one that I'm starting to see is such a part of my life. I like to call it the big lie. And there's a lot of big lies, but this is a good one. I am supposed to be happy all the time. I mean, that got wired in very early in my life. And the other side of that is I shouldn't feel uncomfortable. I shouldn't feel anxious. I shouldn't be sad. I shouldn't be confused. I shouldn't be lost. Somehow I'm supposed to have certainty all the time. That things need to be clear and that I need to have an understanding. And see, these are the more subtle expectations that keep grabbing me. I was talking to my friend the other day, and I'm getting older now. My body just isn't doing some of the things that it could do before in my life in many different ways. And I was telling my friend, I just realized I had this expectation that somehow I expected that I would change in terms of my consciousness. I was hoping that I'd get a little wiser as things moved on. But I had this expectation that my body would stay the same. I don't know where that came from, but that was in the background. That's just one that surfaced lately. God, I had a blood pressure that was like 100/60 until I was like 50 years old. And then it went, we're going to change. We're not going to be at 100/60 anymore. We're jumping up to 140/80 or something like that, or whatever it is now. But that comes back to this phrase you use called emotional agility. And if I was to capture one thing that of what you said that was so powerful, this emotional agility and flexibility, I think, is so critical to the achievement of emotional sobriety. It allows me to roll with the punches. It allows me to be responsive to what is going on, to not to get caught up in objecting all the time, but more is to focus on. And this was said to me early on: how can you become a part of the solution? And that doesn't mean just the solution out there. The solution is how can I find a way to be present in the world and have a different relationship with myself and with you? It's just my final comment is I was reminded of a quote from Dr. Jerry Greenwald, a brilliant Gestalt therapist, taught at UCLA for a long time. And he was all part of that human potential movement in the 60s and 70s that I'm so enamored with. I just love that third wave in psychology. It still excites me tremendously. But this is what he says, and I think that this is reminded me when you were talking about dancing and putting on the record and stuff. Dr. Greenwald says, "It is not possible for me to relate to others intimately and enjoy and allow their full expression of themselves if I have not discovered how to do this for myself." I'll read that again. It is not possible for me to relate to others intimately and to enjoy and allow their full expression of themselves if I have not discovered how to do this for me. You see, and if I don't, I've got to let go of any expectations about myself, right? I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to look like an idiot. Well, what if I let that go? What would my dancing look like? It'd probably be a lot freer, wouldn't it? I would just that's what I loved about, all of the dances in Woodstock. People were just flowing with the music. There was no form to it. They were dancing in whatever way they wanted to dance. Now, yeah, maybe LSD helped with that. I understand it. It helped me with that stuff. But we're talking about emotional sobriety as being able to do that, being sober, being able to be that free and to enjoy ourselves and enjoy life and all these other things. And at the same time, to be able to sit with the sadness, the confusion, the uncertainty, and the not knowing, and to see value in that too. Anyway, thank you so much for a great, great presentation today.
Thanks, Alan. Great comments. I enjoyed that a lot. I'll tell you, one of my biggest difficulties was letting it be okay for me to feel however I was feeling. That in fact, it was probably the biggest help to me. I'm chronic depressive. That's my form of mental illness, if you will. And the thing that helped me probably more than anything else was when someone told me to think of it as meditation instead of depression, and to allow myself to be able to have that without beating myself up because I'm not supposed to. Joe, you have anything you want to share with us?
Oh, I think so. Either that or I don't, and I'll take 5 minutes to prove it. Alan, I'm going to remember now the expression is beware the prophet with one big book, because there's lots of them. And I'm going to find new ways to include indignitude into the conversation. I think I'm all about create your own words. I think that's great. I was reflecting on this coming up, not having any idea what anyone else was going to say about it. And I started sort of scratching my head and searching around for the in-between part, because I know lots of us know about, that if you read Living Sober, it talks about avoiding self-pity, avoiding euphoria, right? You don't want to get into elation too much, because anywhere where you're not completely grounded, it's a high risk sort of thing, especially in early sobriety. But what about that in between? And one of the things I think that inspired that was Great thing about Zoom is all the new members we have at our meeting, and there's a woman, Penny, sober since 1968, 7 kids, and now she's got a couple of daughters, 30 years sober, and she was talking about how in their early sobriety, at least one of them was saying, I'm bored. And she said, maybe you're feeling peace and you don't recognize it. And and I go, I would feel that would be uncomfortable because it would be so unfamiliar. So I was looking things up on the interweb about restlessness and addiction, and I found this little ditty. It says, restlessness is a symptom of addiction that occurs when an individual becomes involuntarily uncomfortable with their environment. It's a way in which the body responds to things that may result in mental and physical stress. Though restlessness is more common than it seems, there are different conditions whereby restlessness can be diagnosed as a symptom. When restlessness occurs more often, this leads to exhaustion. Your heart rate increases, as well as your breathing, which is followed by a loss of concentration. Restlessness becomes intense at night, especially when coupled with anxiety. And it goes on to talk about feeling on edge, being easily fatigued, that there's a time for these things to kick in, like a job interview. That's an absolute normal way to feel. But I have had to, and I found plenty of help in meetings and topics in meetings to help with what to do when I'm down, what to do when I'm up. And I loved what Marya talked about, how it doesn't need to be fixed. I was at a meeting last night about gratitude and about making gratitude lists. And that is good to change your mood. But is recovery a better way to avoid my feelings than drugs and alcohol were? Is that what it's supposed to be? Or is recovery a time when I learn to make space for my grief, to sort of lean into my insecurities and my fears? And all of these things lead to ignorance. And if I'm just reacting to them or dulling them and not exploring them with curiosity, well, what happens is I don't grow, right? I'm still constantly frustrated by the traumas in my life and my reactions to things and that sort of thing. So I need to learn to, make room for those things and be with them. It might have been 2 months ago, someone said fear is 12 miles wide and only half an inch thick, right? Like it's hard to get around, but you can go right through it, in other words. And I think that's a brilliant way to look at things, that these feelings are not to be avoided. I'm, this idea of stop that, like, was it something that was trained into me as a kid? I don't know, right? Don't be mad, don't be angry, stop laughing, whatever, right? It was this, somewhere I picked up this idea that I have to avoid doing these things, but I think it's way more emotionally sane, as it was put, to just sort of be aware of it and be with it, right? It doesn't need to be fixed. You don't need to fix it for me, and I don't need to fix it, and I don't need to fix it in you. People need to feel heard, but they, just talking, just shrunk their problem in half, right? I don't need to say anything back to them to help them, and your coping mechanisms of just sort of making room for these things and being with them and identifying them is half the battle, right? But it's those in between periods that I had to learn to deal with and still do. Otherwise, I make chaos for myself. Busy lists. I tighten deadlines. We were talking about how deadlines amuse me, right? You know, yeah, deadline, whiz, and balance can be like that. Whiz on my way from anger to crying to bliss. But that in between stage where, you know, life, you know, yeah, that balance crap that I talked about. That's so 2 months ago. But that's all I have to add is what do we do, and other people can talk about this too when we open it up, with that nothing's going on, that peacefulness, that I'm not, the house isn't on fire, right? You know, I'm not at the rock concert. I'm just experiencing the day, that sort of breathing in, breathing out stuff, because I don't know about you, but I had to learn how to cope with that as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Alan, somebody in the chat was asking if you would mind putting that quote in the chat. Can you copy and paste it into the chat? I think they're talking about the APA quote on humility. I was looking for it. I have it somewhere, but I can't find it. Marya, did you want to add anything, or Alan, before we take a little break?
I think I really appreciate all you guys input on you know the whole gestalt. The issue around emotional sobriety is so individual, but I do think a couple of the points that you guys made are really, really key. And a lot of what I hear is people saying, and these are people, you know, you guys all have a lot of time taking care of yourselves, is recognizing what's going on. A lot of trouble I've gotten into in my life with emotion is in not recognizing, and now giving myself a minute to gather what am I feeling, and realizing very quickly that that is not the most important thing happening at any given time, is how I'm feeling. That's key for me. Like, it is so tempting to believe that our feelings drive our lives, or should drive our lives, that we live with our heart on our sleeve. Well, a lot of people who live with their heart on their sleeve can't control their behavior, which is their choice, but they aren't people I can have in my life. I need to not be that person. I need to be the person, for my own purposes, who can create an emotional space for other people. And that means I need to keep my own emotional sidewalk a little bit tidier than I used to be able to do. But that's, you know, simplistic. That's all I've got on that. And thanks everybody for contributing.
Thanks, Marya. Alan, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I wanted to hear from you. I want you to make a few comments, John. Come on, you're not getting away with this. No. Your turn. You're up next.
Well, I will say that I'm really intrigued by the by Marya's talking about a strengths-based approach. I think that finding out that I had strengths went a long way. You know, my initial inventories were really easy because I just talked about all the things that were wrong with me. Um, but my sponsor didn't really let me get away with that for long. I ended up having to actually try and dig up some assets without, you know, I had this religious training. So in my religious training, you're not supposed to have anything good about you at all. But I love that APA quote. There's also one in the about humility. The other one that I like is in the big book. It's an accurate self-appraisal, you know, which is a pretty simple thing. I liked also, Marya, you talked about what you need for that: insight, detachment, perspective, practice, which, you know, they used to say, give time, and skills. Um, Insight for me, you know, they used to say, well, you got to pause when agitated or doubtful. Well, pause wasn't always my strong suit. Pause was something very difficult for me, and sometimes is today if I'm really triggered about something, especially if I'm watching the news. But and I also liked what you said um, about emotions being on a range, on a continuum. You know, it's somewhat like when we talk about so-called defects of character, in the sixth step, he says, Bill writes that it's when our instincts drive us blindly or cause us to demand more than is possible or due us. That's the measure of a defect of character. So that it's not this thing that has to be excised, it's a measurement. And I heard a lot of that kind of stuff in what you were saying, Marya. For me, I had a small problem with anger for a period of time in my sobriety, maybe 30 years or so. and uh, but the thing that has helped more than anything else has been meditation and learning what I actually prefer the word mindfulness, because a lot of times I don't know what people are talking about when they're talking about meditation. But what it's led me to is this idea of being mindful of what's going on in the moment. And I think that's what you were talking about when you said insight. Uh, that's not something that happens overnight. Um, and sometimes it's not something that happens currently. So it's a work in progress. I really appreciate that. And the big lie, yeah, that idea that I was raised on Ozzie and Harriet. So everything's supposed to get resolved in 30 minutes. And if it doesn't, it's because there's something wrong with you and you're not doing it right. Uh, that is the big lie. Um, and at this point, I am going to give up. And we're gonna take a little bit of a break. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Marya for just a minute or so she can uh, give us kind of a intro to this discussion. Marya, are you back?
I am. Thank you so much, John. And thanks everybody for coming back for the discussion part. This is kind of the best part. I do want to just two or three small reminders. One, this is not an opportunity to like check in directly with panelists, including me. So folks who are checking in with me, that's great by chat, but that's not what the sharing portion is for. Try and stay on topic if possible within reason of emotional sobriety. And I just want to, anybody who's dealing with eating disorder specific stuff, remember to stay non-specific about behaviors. So let's just, keep it clean, folks. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Neil, you're on. You have to unmute yourself.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Neil and I'm a drunk that don't drink. And I'm coming to realize that the purpose of my life is to die young, as old as possible. Marya, I listened carefully. I heard a little, I'm okay, you're okay. I heard a little, you are what you were when. But most of all, I heard in your dissertation, acceptance of self. And I like that and what it has to do with emotions. During my sobriety of my 34 years, I have come to realize the quality of my soberness over 3 decades has come in waves of emotions of various heights and depths and deep falls, including a stint in the psych ward, which I attempted suicide, which finally made the diagnosis of manic depression 14 years ago. And it was I was trying to control my negativity to do with anger. And I have come to accept the realization that these flowing emotions are absolutely necessary for my growth. That's what I have learned. And I got some of that to stimulate it from what you were talking about. And I also know that I am smart enough to know that I am not always smart enough to know what I don't know. Thank you, Marya.
Thanks, Neil. Marcia?
Hi, sorry, I couldn't find the button. Hi, family. I'm an alcoholic and addict. My problem is Marcia. And I'm in the solution. Well, I am now. Marya, you're on my resentment list. Everybody who comes and makes sense makes the resentment list. So congratulations on that, because what you said about pausing before hitting the send button. Well, that is me, because I hover over that send button when I'm in my emotional state, right? Because I go from, hey, everything is okay, to zombie apocalypse, and I have to take care of everything. And when you said that, every ounce of me just went, you know, she's right. Ooh. And there was the pause, and that little moment of silence, to me, it's deafening. 30 seconds of silence is deafening to me, and you did it for 5 seconds, and it was like poof. So thank you very much for grounding me and helping me be where my feet are, because that's the most important thing. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone else for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kenji in San Francisco.
Hi there, I'm Kenji, and thanks a lot. This has been great. I just wanted to quickly, so I'm a big fan of the Merriam-Webster Unabridged Dictionary. I've looked up words like sobriety and, or rather, spiritual and God, and there's long, I mean, it goes really deep on trying to put those, you know, define those words beyond just right. It's not, it's way beyond a spelling dictionary. But today, when I went to try to find it online, well, it's not online. So the simple Merriam-Webster online dictionary just has a single short definition for humility, which is freedom from pride and arrogance. And I love that, freedom, yay. And that's pretty much true. One other thing I wanted to say was, so I found myself torn, I'm kind of a news junkie, and I found myself torn over kind of driving myself into a state of distraction, and maybe at times gotten loaded over focusing on news, especially online and cable news. And I've been lately just really enjoying kind of relaxing into what seemed to be a better time, a better, more calm time. And suddenly the news is no assault on democracy, and which has me all riled up again. And I continue being torn between staying focused on that stuff to be a good citizen. I know a lot of people in recovery say, I don't pay attention. I have no interest in the news because it upsets me. And that seems like not a good move for the citizenry. But I guess what I do with it is another thing, which is often just to get myself worked up. Thanks.
Thanks, Kenji. I wanted to remind everybody that this is going to be posted on our Freethinkers Living Sober site after I can actually get to it to do it. And that the first 3 webinars are also there already. And we do have a short little time limit of about 2 minutes for speaking. So Kat will let you know when that time happens. Jeb.
Thanks, John. My name is Jeb, and I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic addict. And I love these meetings, and because I'm so interested in how things work for other people, I know how it works for me. And even though I'm a retired trained therapist, a lot of people call me very old-fashioned. I guess I'm a big book apologist in a sense. And I love when, the kind of thing talked about everyone so far. And that humility thing is, I love what Bill said in the 12 and 12. He says it's a clear recognition of who and what we are, followed by a sincere effort to become all that we can. That's what the 4th step is about, provided I don't make it an inventory of immorality. It's a moral inventory. In other words, according to my other big book, the 1939 dictionary, it's an honest inventory. So it has to include the things that I have to build my life on in the future, to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. And one thing that AA gave me is an awareness of my having many, many kinds of feelings and many at the same time. I've only been sober 15,555 days today, but I have been on a pink cloud the whole time because I've always had that happiness, that joy, that gratitude that I was moving away from that old life. And that's because AA taught me to look at those things, to grow in awareness of everything that's going on around me and within me, and to be able to talk about that, hopefully as an attraction to other people to try to adopt a 12-step life. And by that mean a process that includes actions, and that the correct definition for principles is a course of action. So those 12 principles, as are pretty well outlined on pages 60 through 88, what I found is a new way of life, if that doesn't work for other people, there are so many other ways. And I'm so grateful I don't have to drink today. And I think that sometime we need to find a way to ring a bell or something instead of speaking up to it, stop people. So I'm finished. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeb. I know everybody tells me a different way to do almost everything. How about Randy?
I'm Randy, alcoholic. Glad to be here, and thanks to the panelists. Heard some wonderful stuff. I just wanted to mention a couple of phrases and terms that stuck out to me the first time I ever heard them, and they have stuck with me over the years. One was right-sized, and that to me is part of the humility. It's all the way from doing a fourth and fifth step and realizing I have assets as well as shortcomings to, I'm a human, I'm an animal, I need some food, I need some water, some air. I need to have a voice to speak my opinion, but I don't need to drown other people out or hoard those things. And the other phrase was sober history. And I don't know that that's in the literature, but I've heard it for years. If you've been sober 1 week, you have 7 days of sober history. How did you not drink when this thing happened on the 3rd day or the 4th or whatever? So I have several years of sober history on how to not drink. And I also have history of how to be angry and not do something that's going to land me in jail. And, how to somewhat manage my emotions and to learn to live with them. And where Marya danced, I learned when I was 12 years old, I could walk out in the woods until I was so tired I could hardly make it back home, and that helped. If my body got tired enough, my mind would eventually follow. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Randy. Don.
Hi, I'm Don. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks to the panel. Thanks especially to Marya. Great presentation. Just a little anecdote and follow up on it. When I was in my graduating year in high school, the caption under my grad picture was, Don is the original angry young man. We hope he cools down long enough to graduate. And I never did. Curiously enough, I have 3 university degrees, but I've never graduated from high school. I went into university through a back door. And what have I learned about my anger? Because I certainly was an angry person, and I had it until I sobered up. And since then, I've learned that, and I think this is consistent with what Marya was saying, I've learned that it's okay to be angry. There are things that you can be angry about. When I hear about racism, I get angry. When I hear about people being cheated out of their property, I get angry. And I hope now that I can channel these kinds of things in a positive way, feel the anger and then work with it. And one of the things I heard early in the program when I came in, it's a few days now, was your emotions or feelings are mirrors of the soul. And if you look at them and examine them, you can learn from them. And I've done that, I think. Not always successfully, but I've learned a lot. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to somebody else. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Don. Nazila, is that correct pronunciation, I hope?
Yes, it is. Thank you, everyone. And I have a question. What is your suggestion for people who deal with the overwhelm and who've done ton of work but don't have a specific discipline to have a solid daily practice, for example, like meditation or dance? And I'm kind of aware of that the codependency gets in the way, and I take on too much. I've take the role of a caretaker very early on. So I'm there for everyone 24/7. And if you have any, appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Nazila. Marya, would you like to address that?
I would. I really want to address the idea that training for dancing, for sure, not necessary. But I also want to say that feeling our way towards expressive and meditative practices, it isn't a specialty. You know, there are apps. There's my kitchen sink, and I'm in there with my phone dancing by myself. I think what I want to get to underneath what you're saying is the fact that whatever our emotional acting out is, whatever our emotional excess is, whether it's caring for other people or being self-centered, it can go any which way. What I find it really helpful to do is to just strip away, what am I doing for everybody else? What am I doing that's an apology, that's controlling myself, that's trying to hem myself into some little box, and try and get back down to, what do I believe in? What do I want for my own life? And that, while that may sound self-centered, I cannot work for the good of the world if I am not, in fact, taking super good care of myself. I just can't. I run out of joy. I run out of energy if I'm not deriving it from my own life. And so whether it's meditation or dance or meetings or knitting, it doesn't really matter. Finding that way to feed your own spirit and take care of yourself, that is actually the first step in getting clear on whatever else is cluttering your life. That's all I got on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Marya. And I would say, if you're an alcoholic or an addict, before that can happen, sobriety, sine qua non. Before this, nothing else. Rafe.
Hi, I'm Raph. I'm an alcoholic. I had a question too. So today is my 90th day sober, and while listening to the panelists talk, I've realized that a lot of the things that my sponsor has been telling me to do in terms of regulating my mood have been more like distraction, I suppose. Just, doing something that relaxes me instead of exploration. And I feel like he'll probably get more into that when we start working on the fourth step and all the more emotional based steps together. But I was wondering if the panelists thought that there was a time in early sobriety where maybe the exploration of these emotions could lead to relapse or more harm than good, or if we should just like dive into emotional exploration right away. Thanks.
Marya?
I do want to jump on that, particularly if we could, and I definitely, I see Dr. Berger also. I want to jump on that partly because I want to speak first to the issue of trauma, and I want to speak to the issue of emotional, parameters again. And so, exploring one's emotions may not be the most appropriate response to everything. If I sit down and really meditate on traumatic incidents, that is not going to improve my capacity to get through any given day. That said, I don't think it has to be either I am leaning into every emotional state, nor does it have to be I am distracting myself from every emotional state. That to me is where detachment comes in, and mindfulness practices are the best way for me to get better at detachment. If I have stuff come up, if I get triggered, whatever, if emotions get big fast, my first stop isn't to go, wow, all that stuff was really awful and harmful. My first stop is like, wow, a lot of stuff coming up. And I'll sometimes talk about anger, for example, and be like, wow, there's a tiger in the corner of my living room. I'm not going to poke him today. I'm going to recognize there's a tiger in the corner of my living room. He can be there. I don't need to bug him. He isn't going to bug me, but I do need to acknowledge his presence. When we've worked out our space, we can talk. So I don't think it is either all in or none at all. I think it's really find someone who can help guide you within that parameter.
Thanks, Marya. I remember when I was new, a speaker was talking about resentments, and so I asked him, well, I'm 90 days sober and I have this resentment. What should I do with it? And he said, keep it. You know, you got to give time. Um, Alan,
Yeah,
did you have?
I think this is really at the heart of the issue of what emotional sobriety is. And so I don't want to leave you with the impression that emotional sobriety is just us feeling our emotions all over the place and running wild with them. That may be important to do, but the real important thing to do is how we deal with being upset. See, that's the key issue here. It's what do I do? And, you know, I think Bill's letter, if you haven't read it yet, it's really worth going into. And I discuss it. There's many different videos on that you can listen to on YouTube channels of me talking about it. But what he said, he had a great insight. He says, whenever we're upset, whether it's a big deal or not, he says at the root of it is some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand. And see, so what we need to start to look at is how to regulate ourselves, our feelings, right? It's about self-regulation. And the way that we regulate ourselves is to get at what our expectations are. And our expectations are at the root of our disturbance most of the time, 99.9% of the time. And so if what we're learning to do is not just explore our emotions, that's important, but we're learning more how to respond and recover our balance when we're knocked off balance. See, this is about creating more stability. And look, at 90 days, that's so important. And I really believe that because we don't understand this and bring this into our discussions in the rooms enough and in meetings enough, that people are missing the importance of emotional sobriety. The steps are designed to help us achieve that. Bill explicitly stated that in the 12 and 12. So look, don't think about this as just exploring your emotions. It's learning how to cope with what's going on with you. Our emotions are not an infallible guide to the truth. And we need to understand that. We need to deal with that. And we need to learn how to get right-sized, which means letting go of some of these expectations we have on how things are supposed to be and get on with now learning how to deal with these things. So please direct yourself that way, not that other way of just exploring your feelings. It's not about that. It's learning how to cope with them.
Thanks, Alan.
Sure, I'll jump in.
Go, Joe.
Both Raf and who spoke before? Was it Nazila, if I got that right? Just made me think that when I'm either being talked out of the pit of despair or off of a ledge, people remind me that, it's not 0 or 100, right? There aren't Zen master practitioners and incompetence. And it's all a progress. It's all building muscles. It's all working out, right? And getting better at my codependency and getting better at my communication. 2 months from now, John's going to be leading us in a discussion about relationships with others, just pinning you to that. And, and that's where it really comes out, right? Because then you got two incomplete people trying to, sort of fuse some sort of communication. But I have to remember that I can only work with the skills I have now to the best of my ability. It's going to be incomplete. And it's still, that's the life game. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. That's why I always liked that saying that they used to say all the time, give time. And there is time now if we're not drinking and using. Philip?
Thank you. I'm Philip, grateful recovering alcoholic and former drug user. First, thank you so much for hosting these. This is my first time here, and Alan, Marya, and Joe, this isn't very enriching to me. And then as part, particularly Joe was talking about, what do you do with the in-between? And I find if I'm in the in-between too much, that's when I'm really, really screwed. So, I think that's all I've got. So thank you.
Thanks. How about John Clavin?
Hi, John, alcoholic. I hear so much about I this and I that, and when I was new in AA back in the 80s, I was in and out all the time because I said, well, I didn't believe in God, so therefore I have to do it all myself. I have to take care of, I have to do this, I have to do that. And I finally got into the program through, not through honesty, but through an act of desperation. And even after getting in the program, my first 30 years of sobriety, I kept saying I'd be at meetings and I'd say, well, I have to do this. I have to have more patience. I have to do that. And I realized that finally, after all that time, it's not me at all, unless we want to, talk about the separation of the conscious and the subconscious. But it's really about a power greater than myself. Just like I learned in sobriety, out of desperation, I went to AA, did traditional AA, and got sober. And so anyway, let me just leave it. My Serenity Prayer is grant me the serenity to take the next indicated action, which doesn't mean do the next right thing, because I don't know what the next right thing is. I can only take the next action, indicated action, accept the results and the wisdom to learn from the process. So that's where I'm at today. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Heather?
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heather. Thank you. I have never been to one of these before. And I just I noticed it on the app and I thought, I'll have a listen to this. So I'm grateful to be here. But I guess what I'm living, I'm in the fellowship of AA, which I'm finding it absolutely the awareness of self. But what I'm finding with my own self is that I live by myself, is that it's like I feel I have all these beautiful like tools, like my art, my dancing, my writing, and I'm not doing that. And it's like, well, why am I not doing that? Why do I not feel worthy of doing something nice, And then I go into a terrible sadness. It's like, I know I still have a lot of written work to do. I found that when I was writing in my step 4, it was too painful. It was too much at the time. Now I have a good sponsor now. I'm only learning to pick up the phone, but the awareness of who am I being right now for me is the body pain, and how it's like I've got my spine into it. I've let my whole body just go like tied in a bud or something that's like a flower that just can't express. And then it's this unworthy, well, you're not worthy, and this terrible sadness. That's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather. Marya, did you have, I couldn't tell. Did you have something you wanted to respond with that, or?
I do want to respond to that. I certainly know that spot that Heather's speaking about, and I'm sure that most of us do. When I'm in a deep spot that's like a feeling has exceeded its proper proportion, whether it's grief or tiredness, or we call it depression, that, that's a big umbrella term. When I'm in that spot, tiny steps become critical, and they are the only way out of that spot for me. I mean, that to me is like at the far edge and probably past what I'm willing to deal with in terms of sadness at any given time. When it is taking me away from my art, when it's taking me away from my work, when it's taking me away from my body, that's when tiny steps are enough and they're heroic. And so if it's a step like, I'm going to, instead of sitting in the chair that I'm most comfortable in, I'm going to stretch for a minute. That's a step. I'm going to call one friend and say, I didn't want to call you, but I called you, and then hang up. Fine, good, step. Those tiny steps are heroic at a time like that. So, I want to encourage people, when you're in that, whether it's a far edge of one kind or another, that strong emotion, if you can take that one tiny step towards balance, towards caring for yourself, towards returning to a centered spot, take it, and then take another one, and then another one. We gotcha. So.
Thank you. I also wanted to mention, for me, that was one of the reasons I absolutely needed a sponsor. I hated the phone. I didn't like making phone calls. I still don't like phone calls. I actually like Zoom, but it was one of the things that really helped me because I am a chronic depressive, and it took a lot for me to actually pick that phone up. But he really helped me through a lot of that because I had a tendency to just berate myself and chew myself up all the time. And that's one of the places that I don't let myself go anymore because I know where it ends. I've been down in that hole so many times before. So I really am glad to hear that you have a sponsor, and I would encourage you to use her uh, as much as possible. Wendy.
Yes, hello. I want to first thank Marya and all of the panelists and everyone who spoken their truth here today. My parents drank, so by virtue of that, I am an addict and an ACA. Beyond substance, there was tremendous emotional intoxication. Now, I have heard emotional sobriety today. In my mind, that is the opposite. That's what we're here for, right? I had an ex-husband that told me, quote unquote, Wendy, someday you're going to get shot. That's how quickly I used to escalate. Now, the nonverbal skills, the nonverbal, other people's body language is not my friend, but it is my responsibility to observe, to pause, breathe, and pray. I really related to Nazila. I'm a professional codependent. I'm being nurse for 42 years. Where I began and ended, for me, I really appreciated Marya's wisdom there on that. And by virtue of that, I became used to being around people that were emotionally intoxicated and high or drunk, right? I was trained or groomed in that sense. That's where the family addiction, the family disease of addiction and all of that, the shame, all of that, that's where that resides for me in my heart. So I also appreciated what was spoken, Marya, about emotional range. It's all gray, right? It's a spectrum for me, or a sliding scale, if you will, right? So I led a bipolar, I grew up in a bipolar existence, and I appreciated what was reflected on with mental health, because last spring, I was diagnosed as bipolar decades ago. I was taking medicine for it for 17 years. And last spring, I finally got psychiatric assessment. I lived in a bipolar existence in a household. And so I'm hyper vigilant to other people's feelings. I react before they have to say a damn thing. That's my responsibility to pause, breathe, and pray. They get to have their experience. I don't need to name it. Thank you. I don't need to name that for them, but naming it for myself is where I am empowered, right? Like someone said, nothing to fix. There is power in that. I get to pause, breathe, and pray. I get to just stand still and feel, because I got to feel it to heal it. Thank you. I'll share the time. Very much appreciate this. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. Aggie?
Yes, hello. Hi, my name is Aggie and I'm an alcoholic. And this has been really great. I want to thank you all. I don't want to get emotional, but I'm redoing my sobriety. You know, I'm going through my steps again with someone who has a very good understanding of the big book, and you know, I'm in therapy, and I'm trying to redo everything. And I wanted to ask, because for the past, I don't even know how long it is. I know this started before COVID, but I've been experiencing an emotional pain that I never experienced something so painful in all my life, all my years of sobriety, and even before my sobriety. I've never ever experiencing something like this. The only way I can describe it is like it's a feeling of loneliness. And I think I have a lot of fear, which I'm, you know, planning on working through in my steps that I'm redoing. So, but I wanted to know, you know, from what Marya and Alan were talking about, to me, the question was, does it depend on, you know, the level of emotional pain that you have? Because like I said, I've never experienced something in my entire life this painful. It gets to the point where I just want to jump out of my skin and I don't know what to do, you know, and I'm trying to do what, you know, the program is teaching me to do. I'm trying to put action in, and I'm picking up the phone, and I'm trying to get busy, and but I guess my question is, I don't know what else to do, and or what that's all about. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Aggie.
Can I speak to that very briefly? I would like to just, you know, the question you raised, which is, you know, how bad does it have to get before you're like, this is too much? Totally reasonable question. And for me, I'm often toggling between, you know, this is, you know, we're all like literally globally in a crisis. So recognizing that we are in a shared experience has lifted some of the feeling of isolation from me. No one in here has had an easy year. And I know you say this started beforehand, but the sense of stress, the sense of global fear, the sense of anxiety, all of those things are feeding whatever our pre-existing emotional, you know, maybe weak spots might be. And they are challenging, I think, all of us to find new ways of coping. And I don't know that everybody's done a great job of that. I haven't done that great of a job, but we can work on it. And so, like, I always feel like, you know, my baseline is always, if this has exceeded my skill set, then yes, I need some support. But sometimes that means call a friend. Sometimes it means call a doctor. Sometimes the thing is, existentially speaking, there are parts of our life that are going to hurt more than they have ever hurt before. I've lost people in my life recently and been like, this is an excess, like, this is pain. I didn't ask for this much pain. This is more pain than I said was okay with me. And everybody's like, sorry, because what do? We proceed, we go on, you know, it's sort of Godot. I can't go on, I must go on. That said, finding relief in that, finding comfort in that is critical. And those things that give us comfort that are not self-harming or other harming, for me, it is stuff like physical activity. It is stuff like nature. It's stuff like dancing. And all of that sounds like not a grand enough gesture to relieve the pain, but it does in fact relieve the pain piece by piece by piece. And so that's, I feel it, I hear you, but, you know, giving it a little bit of time may help.
One of the issues I have, or challenges for me, I don't even disagree with it, but I don't, is the idea of, you know, being stripped of our like emotional wrongs, our character defects, our shortcomings. I don't agree with that, but I understand what they're saying. And I'll borrow Randy's word, right sizing, right? You know, because these things need to be right sized, and to be emotionally stressed, even depressed or anxious in an existential threat of a pandemic is not off base. You know, that's your you know, your engine working properly. So yeah, I think it's important to remember we gotta just sort of keep everything in context, including the times we're in. But thanks for bringing that up. You got me on all those spots. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. And if I could give a plug for 2 months from now, I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the presentation on interpersonal neurobiology, which is talking about how important our interpersonal relations are in being able to walk through this stuff. I was anti-dependent. I didn't want to have anything to do with anybody if I could avoid it. It was my job to take care of me, and pardon the French, but fuck all of you. Well, that doesn't work. It's not a skillful way to approach life. But how do I change that? And it's taken me years to change some of those behaviors, some of that thinking, and some of those emotional responses. Darren.
Yeah, I had a question for Marya. You know, maybe I just wanted to hear a little bit about your experiences with emotional sobriety and Minnesota Nice, and if you had any advice for that.
Welcome.
It's all
Sorry,
yours,
but that's my
Marya.
advice. Honest to Christ, man. Like I am, first of all, not from Minnesota. I'm from the West Coast. And that said, being in any culture, whether it is a small town or Minnesota in general or American pop culture, being told what I can and can't say and how I can and can't feel tires me immediately before it's begun. So my feeling is not that I'm going to like walk into a group of knitting and be like, by the way, my political opinions are, but when I am interacting with people, I don't need to adapt what I feel or who I am, as long as I'm speaking respectfully, as long as I'm being genuine. And when I am myself genuinely, a lot of people don't like me, and that is so okay with me. That is so okay. And getting okay with not meeting everybody's needs all the time. I mean, who do I think I am? God? Not everybody has to like me. I need to be respectful. I need to take care of myself. I need to be good in relationships. Minnesota Nice tells me that every feeling is too many feelings and tells me every word is too outspoken. And we've had that conversation and it didn't go well. So more power to you, Darren. I'm glad to see you here. Thanks for asking.
Thanks, Marya. Alan, I know you have to leave in a few minutes. Would you like to make any closing comments for yourself before you have to leave?
Well, you know, one of the things coming up is we're talking about how to deal with, you know, a lot of troubling and painful emotions. And, you know, I think it's very important that we, first of all, bust up the myth of singularity. So if I say I'm depressed, that's really not true. Is what's going on is there's a part of me that's telling things that are depressing me. And my problem has always been listening to those parts. I somehow give them an awful lot of authority. And I don't know why. You know, I keep waiting for them to tell me something that's going to be worthwhile. And they really haven't told me much that's worthwhile. I think listening to ourselves is way overrated. You know, it's way overrated. Not the best person in the world to consult to is these other sides of me. So I've found in the work that I've done personally and the work that I do as a therapist is coming into a dialogue with these different. So if I'm depressed, the part of me that's, you know, telling me what I should be depressed about. And for me to find a way to talk to that part and have a different experience with it. See, that's the problem. These things, we create these kind of ruts in our consciousness that go into the same, Bill called it, can't get off the merry-go-round. We know we need to, but we just can't find a way to get off of it. We keep kind of recycling the same stuff. And see, part of recovery is, in my opinion, discovering new possibilities. And so when I externalize my conflict that I'm having with myself, I put the part over there that's telling me to be depressed or telling me to be anxious or whatever it's doing, beating me up. I mean, you know, I've got all kinds of, I love the way that Dr. Mary Goulding talked about it. I've got all kinds of villains in my head right? I've got many Mr. Hydes that take on a lot of different masks. And my job, and Bill refers to this in one way, but I think that Gestalt therapists have really talked about it wonderfully, is to find an appropriate balance and coordination of all that I am. See, how do I put these parts that are so disharmonious and not necessarily working in my best interest? You know, my alcoholic self, when I'm in trouble, tells me to pick up a drink. That's what it knows what to do. Now, I believe today that it's not, you know, it's malicious. It's just is trying. That's all it really can recommend. You know, it's like a one-trick pony. You know, if all you got is a hammer on your belt, then everything has to be a nail, right? So then I go around and pounding things. But what I've found is that if I enter into dialogue with some of these different parts of myself, and I work with someone who either it has, I like to call them an enlightened witness that can bring some new information into my life, some new experience, then I can start finding new responses to all of these situations that used to baffle me, confuse me, and I start to find a new path through these things. And so that's what I really think that one of the things that we have to think about is how to separate ourselves from these different parts. Because we're back again, if I'm like this with depression, there's no space. And everything we've talked about today is creating the pause. Another way of thinking about pause is creating space. We've got to find a way to create the space, because in that space, we're going to find that solution. And it may not present itself like this. Sometimes you get a space and you just sit with it for a while. A couple days later, you sleep on it and you go, oh, that's what's going on for me. And then you get it and you put it together. The good news is that every part of you is moving towards closure. And when we don't come up with a way of figuring these things out, it's because we get in the way of the process. That's just inherent in us. We're always moving towards what we can be. We are if we don't get in the way. And, you know, I call that the God within us. I mean, it's unbelievable. You regulate your temperature without knowing it. You know, you walked without anybody having to tell you to get up and walk when you were an infant. You wanted to do that. You want to regulate yourself. So if we can just get out of our way, we can start to discover some of this stuff. So thank you for letting me share that, John.
All right. Thanks, Alan.
I'm so looking forward to next month. That's where you're going to be, or 3 months from now. What's our date, by the way? Why don't we announce that a couple?
Well, it's going to be at the end. I think it's May 30th or something like. It's the last Sunday in
May 30th. Yeah.
May. Yeah. Let's see if we can squeeze a couple more people in here to participate. Samantha.
Hi, everybody. My name is Samantha, and I guess you already said that. So, sorry. I am such a huge fangirl of Dr. Berger. I've read his books a million times and continue to overread them and read them and listen to his CD and his everything. So I'm so grateful to be introduced to everybody else's work here. And I, you know, for so many years, because I had alcoholic parents, I was the victim all the time. And Sister B told me I spoke fluent victimese, and that was all I knew. That was my whole identity, was to be the victim. And then a few years ago, well into my 30-year sobriety mark, we lost everything. We lost our business and our home and our credit and everything. And the wheels fell off of my cushy life. And I really had to dig deep in my sobriety. And thank goodness that this emotional sobriety stuff was out there, because it saved me. And I can so identify with Bill at 28 years, I think he was, when he finally figured this stuff out. It's just like sobriety 2.0. And I'm so grateful to all of you that are doing this work and helping the rest of us out and trying to figure this stuff out, because I don't think I could have got it early on. So super grateful for all of you. And I just wanted to tell you that. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. John?
Sorry, just I think Mr. Berger was addressing exactly the type of question I had. I'm 31 years sober, and about 3 years ago, the IRS were asking me in the American languages, IRS, Canadian languages, CRA, and they were shutting me down in terms of what they were doing to me. So I had an emotional breakdown, you might want to call it, anxiety attacks that I couldn't control. So I went on to medication, which was the right thing to do, I think, from talking to the doctors and the therapist. But that aside, I'm now 31 years sober, and I don't have the same pause buttons that I had before. I've tried mindful meditations, and I'm trying to come slowly off the anti-anxieties, but I just boosted it again this week because I have a deadline missed. So somebody talked about deadlines too. So, and I'm a wallflower. So, so that's why Mr. Berger's resolutions are more apropos for me, is to try and find the pause button. And I have the same voices in my head, but usually when I'm sober and content and not have the anxiety, I can find those pause buttons. So I need some added pause buttons when I allow my emotions to drive me into exhaustion and thereby emotional hangovers. And I think some of it is age related, and that's what I wanted to bring up.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for being here too. I'm going to give you some links and things like that so that you can explore further if you want. We have a feedback page, and we'd very much appreciate your feedback. You can either go to our feedback page, or you can just email freethinkerscottonwood@gmail.com. Let us know if there's anything you want to say about this or the previous workshops on emotional sobriety, or if you have an idea about what you'd like to see in the future. There isn't any charge for this workshop, but we do have a contributions page at the emotional sobriety website. That's es.freethinkerslivingsober.org. Once again, I want to acknowledge and thank Alan and Marya and Joe for presenting today, for all of you guys for participating and attending, and our backstage helpers, John S., Mark S., and Kat L. Thank you all very, very much. Our next workshop in the series will be at the same hour, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, on May 30th. I'll be presenting on interpersonal relationships, a pathway for emotional sobriety. And thank you for attending the workshop. Here's some pages for information about us. And I'm also going to give you some information about where you can see more about Dr. Berger's site is at abphd.com. He has a lot of stuff on his YouTube channel as well, as do we. And Marya Hornbacher has a site, maryahornbacher.com. And of course, Joe has a site at rebelliondogspublishing.com. And he's doing a podcast that, is it periodic, Joe, or is it monthly, or I don't remember what you said.
As needed.
As needed, as he needs. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. We'll probably stay here for a little bit longer. But that is the official ending of our workshop.
John, let me just put in a plug for the Thursday night emotional sobriety meeting that I started when COVID hit. It's at 7 p.m. I put the Zoom code and the password in the chat room, so you guys can plug it in then. It's Thursday nights at 7 o'clock, and I'm really excited. My new book will be out in June 3rd or 8th is the release date, depending. And if you go to Fourth Dimension Publishing, you'd be able to pre-order it.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank
Joe?
you, John, for hosting.
You betcha. Joe, did you have any final thoughts that you'd like to?
I'm going to borrow another Randy word, which is sober history. Everybody here has an emotional sobriety history too, right? Everyone's got something to share. Everyone's got something for the next person. And yeah, these are great forums to bring these up, but let's bring them all to our home group and in our interactions with the people in our lives. And yeah, the second half was the best half, you know, it always is that way. Thanks.
I don't know. I'm gonna
Thanks, Joe.
thank you, Joe. As far as I know, the ID and passcode will be the same unless we have to change it. you, you can always check with our website on emotional sobriety. I always post it there. That is es.freethinkerslivingsober.org. Marya, would you care to give any closing remarks?
I don't have a single thing except thanks everybody for participating, for being present today, and take it out to your groups and your lives. Good to see you all.
Oh, fabulous.
Thanks, Marya.
And I guess the only thing I would say is, you know, none of us is really the ultimate be all and end all word on any of this. We're just trying to talk about our own experience, strength, and hope, and your experience counts. And thank you.